right. Thanks for coming, GM, Rune. I think we can just kind of get right into it. So I want to get deep into Endgame, but for the uninitiated, let's start with just high level. What is it, and where are we in the timeline of, sub-DAOs launching, AI, Solana, all that?
Well, I mean, maybe the even better place to start is to just reiterate what Maker even is. Right, Maker, we're the oldest, we're the largest DAO in the world. What that means is it's basically a bunch of people, using the internet and using blockchain to manage the world's largest decentralized stablecoin. So like a currency network that is above like $5.2 billion in circulation at this point.
5.3.
5.3. Yeah, it's been growing a lot. It's been growing like more than 800 million in the last month. So it's growing a lot. It's massive. It's one of the, crypto is quite down at the moment, but Maker is one of the projects that are very much going up and growing. But the problem is it's gotten so big that it's sort of hitting these scalability barriers. And they're actually not like technical, they're more like social in a sense, or sort of decision-making barriers when it comes to being very large, but still just like a network of people collaborating over the internet. So Endgame is the solution that attempts to tackle this with a number of different tools, the most important being the sub-DAOs, but then also, as you mentioned, AI tooling and even optimized blockchain backend improvements. But really, I mean, these long-term solutions, like the AI and the blockchain stuff, is something that's really coming much later. And right now, in the short run, what's really exciting are the sub-DAOs, because that's what is going to help us grow the ecosystem today, and I think it's going to address a lot of the issues that we're seeing like right now.
So there's 6 sub-DAOs, and they're all launching kind of roughly the same time. And you want them to be, you want Maker Core to ossify, slow down, be kind of more, anti-fragile, but you want these sub-DAOs to go off, take more risk, onboard new assets, target new regions. How much risk do you want them to take on? How fast do you want them to move? Like, how aggressive do you want them to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, the thing is really, right, so the overall idea is called Endgame, right? And that's exactly because it's all about, let's find some final state that doesn't have to change. So at the absolute core of it is this like, eternal ideal of crypto, that it should be like Bitcoin, it should just be like one particular way, and then it never changes, and then there's no drama. There's nothing to fight about, right? And there's no risk of the platform you're building on changing, right? So that's really the ideal state for like any crypto system, especially if you're just like thinking about it for 5 seconds, and you don't think any further. Then that sounds really easy to get to. But then quickly you realize, the problem is we live in the real world. So things change, and the environment changes, and there's new opportunities, and there's new challenges, and there are new risks. And I'll wait with even getting into how much more sort of multidimensional that is when you're dealing with stable coins, and sort of real advanced finance on top of just this basic idea of just like things change. Sub-DAOs enable that sort of best of both worlds in the sense that the core gets to be completely, it gets to be a lot more locked down than it could possibly be otherwise without sub-DAOs, right? And that's because it can just say, look, any kind of adaptation, any kind of change, any kind of evolution, we'll let that be handled by the sub-DAOs. And then to your point about like how fast should they move, how slow should they move, that's the beauty of it, is that there's going to be many of them. So each of them gets to decide by itself, right? And then we see some of them will fail, some will succeed, and those that succeed will be basically the benchmark that new ones that are continuously created will then learn from and actually, evolve even further from, right? Meanwhile, the failures are also going to be, very important learnings, essentially, for the whole ecosystem to see this is how things can go wrong, this is what happens if you go too fast, and all of that can be well integrated for the whole ecosystem, essentially, right? So in the end, I mean, yeah, I guess the theme is really best of both worlds, right? You get this flexibility of individual DAOs, individual small focused communities, yet you also get the scale of the entire Maker ecosystem, and you allow it to scale much further, right? We can break the scalability barrier, go far beyond, go from 5 billion to 100 billion easily, if we're lucky. And in doing that, these economies of scale that Maker currently enjoy will just grow even further, right? And all of the sub-DAOs will be able to access it together and essentially share it, while also act individually, independently, flexibly, right? Innovate, take risks, sometimes even fail, and it's going to be okay.
So we had a lot of failures in the last cycle. We've got like 1,000 Uniswap clones. We've got like 100 Aave forks. What's interesting to sub-DAOs about me is like this is a new way of kind of just building DeFi protocols, and it's all bootstrapped by DAI and the token economics and the reflexivity of that. What happens to DeFi going forward if everything is just, Maker, effectively? Is everything going to launch as a sub-DAO now, or what's kind of the new paradigm of the new builders who want to get involved in DeFi? Do they have to go to the Maker ecosystem? What does that look like for them?
I think what we learned from the last cycle, the last bull run, is that, DeFi is essentially, it's not just Maker. It's Maker, it's Aave, it's Uniswap, it's Compound, a couple of others. And that was kind of what we saw, right? That like you had this massive like DeFi summer, this huge bull run, and basically it's like Lido came out of it, and probably a couple of others as well that are major now. But for the most part, it actually just reinforces what I've always thought of DAOs sort of from the very early days, which is that they're just like a DAO, like a real DAO is a kind of a category of organization that is an order of magnitude larger than a company, in the sense that a DAO that is like small isn't gonna, well, let me just clarify. When I say DAO, I mean the type of DAO that, like the sort of the DeFi-oriented protocol DAO. So I know there's many like different sort of shades of DAOs and sort of ways to classify them. So I guess the old school type of DeFi DAO, they just have to be really, really big, and if they don't reach that size, they can't sort of sustain themselves. They sort of just kind of fall apart, I guess, because there's so many. Like you need a certain size to have all of those sort of multipolar dynamics that enable a real community and that enable decentralized governance, and it's going to be functional enough to run something as advanced as a DeFi protocol. So I think that we'll see. So I think the sub-DAO model is how you can then take the scale that these top projects are at today, and then just like take it to the next level, right? So I would expect that we will maybe see, maybe there's still room for a few more. For sure there is actually, right? Definitely there's going to be someone coming out with some new amazing innovation, and it's going to like turn into like a real DAO, and it's going to reach the same size and momentum and Lindy effect as some of the other OGs. But I would expect that over time you'll see the sub-DAO model everywhere for anything that, it's just going to be required to really grow, I think. And actually, if you look at Aave, right, the Go stablecoin model has some like very significant sub-DAO sort of dynamics to it. In fact, I was already deep into thinking about sub-DAOs when they announced their design, but it definitely like solidified for me that this is like the natural evolution of things, right? In many ways, if you've really simplified, then the difference with Maker sub-DAOs and then the Aave Go, I think they call them facilitators, these sub-modules, is that theirs is based on staking staking the original token, so it's like illiquid. It's more sort of illiquid. And then what Maker sub-DAOs do is they take that and sort of tokenize it. So now it's not just you stake your tokens, it's like you got an actual liquid exposure. And then there's, I guess, more freedom as well for Maker sub-DAOs. Like they really are like, let's unleash the wisdom of the crowd. Let's really just like see what can be done with this, and position the core of Maker as more than anything else as this like infrastructure that just provides kind of like this general boost, and then we'll see where the sub-DAOs go, and that's going to be the most interesting thing, right? It's going to be them doing stuff that nobody's predicting at this point.
So another part of the Maker end game is the rebrand and the redenomination, and people probably don't remember this, but Chinese crypto back in the day, Ant shares rebranded to Neo, and that was like a big moment. It reset the community. It kind of put them on a new path. What's the thinking behind the new brand? I know you've said in the past that Maker is like, too boring. You want it to be new. You want it to be exciting. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, so actually I think the number one thing that I think is so important and such a big opportunity with the new brand is just to have a single brand instead of two brands. Because today it's DAO and Maker, and I mean it was basically something I made up like 7-8 years ago without really knowing what was going on. Right, I was sort of a crypto religious sort of crypto anarchist, and yeah, so obviously it's a big problem when the brands are completely separate, because I mean what happens is, and actually not only are they totally separate, but there's not even like a way to describe the ecosystem as a whole in sort of a way that encompasses both, right? The closest is to say MakerDAO, but then you're completely leaving out the DAO brand, which is by far the biggest part of the ecosystem, right? And so what happens is there are so many DAO holders out there, they have no idea what Maker is at all. So we're like losing out on a lot of the really, I mean, what I think is actually the really, really interesting sort of network effects that are possible with DeFi and crypto, which is this thing of like the user can be the owner, right? Yet most DAO holders, they don't realize that if they want to not just use a product, if they want to really be a part of operating it and keeping it safe, then they can go and buy MKR. But they don't know what MKR is. So the new branding is doing, I mean, it's really focused on this particular thing, right? We want the user bases to overlap more. We want to make it really easy to go from adopting the stablecoin and then also to get further into the ecosystem if you're interested in that. And so there's two ways we're doing this, right? So the first is to redenominate the new MKR, right? So it goes from being this like, I don't know what to call it, like almost like elitist, super expensive coin that definitely, I mean, attracts. Like the choice of having very few MKR coins did help attract some, like, I would say, very sort of quantitative people. But I mean, it turns out crypto is also so much about kind of the community spirit and the feeling of momentum, the excitement. We kind of lost out on that to a large extent. And that's what I say, I mean, that's what I think makes Maker feel a little bit more boring than like other communities and other tokens that are just set up to be more sort of accommodating to new people coming in. So by having way more tokens, so anyone can buy 100 tokens, anyone can get easily 100 tokens, 1,000 tokens, that's just a signal saying, look, there's opportunity here for you, right? We want you to join. You don't have to be a super rich or super genius, you can just have fun and try it out. And to make it even easier, when we do this rebrand launch, and I'll clarify the rebrand part in just a second, but so the new brand, when it launches early next year, it will also launch with the ability to use the new stablecoin to farm the new governance token. So you can directly, if you hold the stablecoin, you'll directly be able to get the governance token for free. So you don't even have to make the choice to like buy it or anything. You can really just say, yeah, I want the token for free, I want to try it out. And I think that's going to be another of these, like, make it a lot smoother to get deeper in. But, I mean, actually, I really want to emphasize that, of course, more than anything else, it's also just coming up with a better brand for sort of a consumer-focused stablecoin than DAI, right? Because DAI, again, it was kind of like randomly made up, basically, many years ago, right? And the new brand, the goal is to engage top brand designers and brand strategists globally, right, that have proven themselves in crypto and in the real world, and then be like, let's figure out what is the absolute best brand that's gonna like break the crypto bubble that's going to get out in the real world, that's going to engage people and just bring people into crypto and make it easy to understand why this makes sense as something that's going to keep your money safe, also something that's going to be more fun than normal finance and normal banking, and then all these other sort of follow-on effects of the farming, the governance token, the ease of going deeper. I mean, that is all just secondary to having just a really, really awesome brand.
I see people posting all the time, like nostalgic DeFi summer, screenshots of like the yams front end and all that shenanigans. And there is an aspect of sub-DAO farming where you can take Maker and you can take DAI and farm it, and you can actually take the sub-DAO tokens and then farm the new governance token. Like, what do you want the outcome of that farming to be? And is there some reflexivity in the system where it's like you're growing the DAI supply by kind of this reflexive model of farming and then bootstrapping junior capital in the sub-DAOs? I mean,
so the thing about the tokenomics is it's really, right, the tokenomics, basically the kind of the programming, the design of how the tokens are distributed, how you can get the tokens for free, how they're created and emitted, right? It's all based on this idea that we're taking something that is just fundamentally, well, nowadays, if I tell this to crypto people, it's fundamentally simple. 8 years ago, when we first came up with it, it was like mind-blowingly complex, right? But basically, the basic business model of a stablecoin is relatively simple, right? You've basically got people holding a stablecoin, and that means now you can deploy collateral, and you can earn yield from that collateral. And the tokenomics of sub-DAOs are essentially kind of, in some sense, it's just gamifying this really basic business model to something that's a little bit more dynamic, and it's more fun, I would say, when you've got more than just cash moving around the system. You've got actual tokens that all have different sort of additional value to them potentially if the community is right, if the governance that they create is right. But the absolute basic core business model is still there of, people basically hold a stable coin and then the system deploys collateral and generates yield from that. And the way that ultimately all these tokenomics of all the sub-DAOs, all the tokens, the way that it's just fundamentally kept sustainable and sound and isn't some thing that's going to create a bubble or go to zero or something, right? So it is that when you choose to farm these tokens, so whether it is the new governance token, which you can choose to farm, right? Like I said, that's going to be available to farm immediately. And then following from that, the sub-DAO tokens will be available maybe in Q2. Not making any promises, obviously it's ready when it's ready. But
not financial advice.
Yeah, but all of these tokens, all of these cool things, they're mutually exclusive. When you got to pick one of them, right? And that's kind of the game, right? Is you got to figure out what's exciting for you to do, right? And one of the choices is just also the boring old DAI savings rate, rebranded with a new brand, of course. That's just going to give you a classic yield in cash. So essentially, that's how the system is paying for all this tokenomics and gamification of the ecosystem and parallelization of innovation and communities. It's all being paid for, again, with the same basic old business model of the users are providing the stable coins, the DAO deploys it for yield, and then the DAO either gives a yield back to the user in the form of the DAI savings rate, or the DAO takes that yield and uses it to finance essentially all of this tokenomics and provides you with many different flavors of sub-DAOs or just the governance token of the DAO itself. And okay, one more point I want to make, going back to the new brand thing, is that so this is all like super crazy for some people, right? I mean, we're talking about many different tokens, so much stuff happening. What's also really important about all of this is that actually DAI and MKR, like the old school, OG Maker, isn't going away either. So it's not that it's getting it's not getting changed and it's sort of getting foisted on the users that now it's called something else. Now there's all these crazy things you have to think about. It's an entirely optional choice to migrate to the new brand and essentially upgrading your DAI to the new upgraded DAI, the new stablecoin, upgrading your MKR to the new redenominated new governance token. It's an option that's available for those who want to try out the new features, or maybe they just prefer the new brand. But many people are just going to be like, I don't want to deal with, this is my stablecoin. I don't want you to mess around with it. So we're not going to, nothing's going to happen to people who just hold DAI. It's just going to keep working as always. Same for MKR, it'll just keep being the same thing. And all the tokenomics and all that, it's not going to apply to MKR, and it's not going to apply to DAI. It's an optional thing to basically upgrade. And you can also always move back. So you can always migrate back. And this will just be, there's a key thing to preserve this so that there's not going to be any like uncertainty or fear of like what's happening, is the rug getting pulled under the system or something. Basically the old system remains exactly the same. And as I said, the fundamental economics, the fundamental business model, it's the same basic, simple stablecoin business model. And then all of these new features are basically just added on top of it, essentially as a form of gamification, as a form of parallelization that likely will really boost the ecosystem as a whole, but also isn't like changing the absolute fundamental sound economics of the system.
This is a very different Maker than what I remember in 2020, 2021. It felt like you guys were the stalwart, slower moving, more safe, and this is entirely safe as well. But like it felt like at some point you got re-inspired to go a different direction. You took some lessons from the last bull market of, the Lunas of the world and what happened there and how to build a more sustainable system. Like what was the thing that kind of reinvigorated you, re-inspired you to go off in this new direction? Because Maker probably could have just sailed off into the sunset and been a smaller version of itself, but this just feels so much more ambitious.
Well, so I alluded to it earlier, and I guess to put it mildly, basically Maker ran into scalability issues. So so it really was the realization that what you just said, it could just sail off into the sunset. That's what we always thought, right? We've been working on that for 8 years, 7 years, I guess, at the time. And it was done in many ways, right? The Maker Foundation had dissolved, and the project had fully transitioned to being run by the community nominally. And what I realized was just that it simply was not going to survive in the state it was in, because the governance was just didn't work, basically. Like, we had been too naive in, it's like the classic crypto mistake of like build it and they will come. Just like make a voting system and then they'll like the free market will like figure out how to vote and figure it all out. And of course that's not what happens. Like, it's like, it's such a, it's like dumping a libertarian Somalia, Just like what actually happens is just like this, like very, if you really just give a blank slate and voting and a lot of money, then you get this like very cutthroat politics and also like very bad dynamics. So all of this stuff, the tokenomics, the parallelization, the sub-DAOs, it's basically creating like a framework, right? Creating a system, a sort of a set of processes that can create some like boundaries, create some stability, and then actually allow the governance process to hit, actually sort of find healthy dynamics, right? Find a healthy way to work and operate so that people are naturally, pushed towards and incentivized towards interacting with the system in a way that is mutually beneficial for the whole system, right? So we want to push people away from kind of trying to extract value from the system and push them towards taking actions that generate value for the system and which then comes back to them. And the most absolute basic dynamic to use to illustrate this, right, is just like the basic concept of the sub-DAO token and sort of compartmentalizing different types of decisions and risk and exposure to those decisions and risk, right? So in sort of the, like, in the OG way, like the mega monolithic DAO blob way, there's so many decisions, there's so many areas of specialization at the same time, right? It's like deep technology innovation, super advanced real assets in different jurisdictions. And it's like any particular decision that leads to success or failure in any particular area of the DAO, it's just a sort of a drop in the bucket, kind of like it doesn't create enough of an effect that people will be sort of directly impacted by it. So the motivation often is like just do something so it looks good or whatever, you know, like just make the politics happy so it keeps going. And I think in particular, it's like even if you pay people in token in this situation, it's like even if they're getting paid in tokens and they're contributing to the DAO and you know if they do work for the DAO that benefits it, in theory that can generate more value for them because they hold the token. But it's just that token is such a small part of such a huge economic system that the value is like it's just they would never really feel that change in value. You know, yeah, they did one good RWA deployment, and that generated some money for the whole DAO. But what trickles back to them from the tokens they're getting is so small they don't like feel it. And then it becomes like, okay, I'm better off figuring out how to just extract some value. With sub-DAOs, it's like now you like own like a huge percentage of this. Right now you like have, you know, like, I mean, multiple percentages of this entire sector of real world assets activity, right? And when you make a decision, if you make like a home run on like one great real world asset deal as a contributor in this situation, having like a lot of tokens, right? I mean, then you may be able to retire, you know, like it's sort of the startup dream in a sense, right? And so it just completely changes the dynamic, right? Because now everybody who's in this already, they're going to be like, look, if I make the right decisions, that's going to really benefit, benefit me, and I'm going to make sure that other people who are in it like this and are deeply involved in like the decision making, the execution, they need to have the same mindset as me. They need to also be in it for like, let's make sure the sub-DAO is a success. In the OG monolithic model, these like broken political dynamics often cause people to seek towards, I need like loyalty. I need people who support me politically. And basically they'll cover for me, even if something goes wrong, they'll support me politically, and then I'll support them. I don't care about the skills. People think in politics, right? In this smaller scale situation, people think in like results and execution. And it's related to Dunbar's number to an extent as well, right? It's like, is it your friends, or is it a bunch of like anonymous people who are potentially trying to extract value from you as well?
The analogy of DAOs where it's dropping a libertarian in Somalia is one of the funniest things that I've ever heard. I was trying not to laugh out of respect, but I mean, one question I have is, like, I read Endgame and I thought it was very thoughtful. You know, like, I see the core team that you're working with now. I think they're extremely talented. It feels like there's like this disconnect between like the crypto Twitter set and like the actual progress that's going on in Maker. Like why is Maker so misunderstood?
I wouldn't say Maker is misunderstood in general, because I mean most people get it. But it is. I mean, it's such a funny contrast, right? To when you open up Twitter and you're like, your face almost melts, and then you go to like events in the real world and people are so much nicer. I mean, this is what's happening. It's the same reason why like American politics are so broken and social media is so broken, right? It's just like. So it's not. I would say it's not really Maker. It's Twitter that's causing this in a sense, right? Like the characteristic that Maker has that's really bringing this kind of polarization out in people, right? Is that just it's a leader, right? So to me, it's always like the more people are freaking out and angry on Twitter, that to me is always like that's one of the best ways to like measure results and measure we're doing the right thing. Because that shows me, okay, now we are in the leading position. Like now this is what people are caring about. Once they stop being pissed off all the time, and that was kind of actually what's happening sort of at the time when Maker just were like not really finding its way, right? Maker was sort of increasingly being forgotten, sort of buried under our governance drama, and then everyone else being more shiny and more fun. That was the time when like nobody was really criticizing Maker. At least not as much, right? Now we're back in the leading position, right? Trailblazing the space. And I mean, a lot of people are very passionate about crypto in general, and then that means they need to have an opinion about us. Yeah, and then I mean, another thing is that Maker really is a real DAO, at least the realest DAO, in the sense that you really get to see how the sausage is made, right? So one thing is that, I mean, that could allow people to then like dig in and actually try to understand how things really work, but that's a lot of work, you know? It's a lot easier to like just find any part of it, dig in, and then find something that's a good, soundbite on Twitter, and then, use that to spin whatever narrative, whatever bias you've already got. I mean, okay, so this is more than anything else, this is really what happened with the Solana thing, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
So the reality is that Maker is like, I mean, Maker, I can't claim we're like the biggest supporter of Ethereum, the private supporter, ecosystem supporter of Ethereum, but we're definitely one of the absolute biggest, right? So in the Maker ecosystem today, like I hadn't even counted this before, but so right now Maker is like actively incubating and supporting 5 different absolute cutting-edge EVM development companies, right? And all of these companies are, they're Maker developers, right? Like we have managed to like scale up the amount of these like, ultra talented developers in a way that's, even beyond what we've done in the past, and we're setting them up as like independent companies. And a big part of Maker's approach to building the ecosystem is that we make sure that contributors that contribute to Maker are also set up to contribute to the rest of the ecosystem, right? So we encourage these companies to go and also develop on other DAOs, on other protocols, start their own projects on Ethereum, right? And make sure they got all the absolute best-in-class tools, and more important than tools, the right culture and the right mentality and the patience it takes to build, DeFi the right way. And I mean, today we've got 5, but that's only going to increase. I mean, our goal is just to keep expanding on Ethereum, just keep building out on the EVM, right? Especially focus heavily on L2, because that's where we think the real, potential for for growing the user base, bringing in the new users is going to be, right? And so the thing is, the reason why it's possible for us to have so many developer companies expand to all L2s sooner or later, right? Right now it's, like there's some announcements about also going to Polygon and Gnosis. Those are some announcements that were made with the Spark sub-DAO is going to focus heavily on them, right? And basically my point is, so it's possible to do so many things at once because of the sub-DAO model, right? So the sub-DAOs allow us to not have it be the monolithic Maker core, sit down and be like, okay, we'll go on this L2 and that L2 and this blockchain, and like it's so difficult. It's way too difficult to try to figure that out with just a single monolithic DAO that has to have its governance system set up to be able to actually stabilize a currency at global scale. Sub-DAOs that are set up to be flexible and risk takers, they can do this kind of stuff, right? So they can just, it's going to allow us to just absolutely boost the innovation in Ethereum, spread to, boost all the L2s, right? Really be able to like move fast and find partners and find things to support in the ecosystem that is growing, right? And again, it's like primarily it's going to be Ethereum, obviously, because that's where it's all happening, right? And that's where Maker currently is rooted, and that's where the sub-DAOs are all focused on, right? And so the thing is, Endgame is, step 1 of this is the early stages of Endgame, is all about kind of setting up this layer of like, let's get the model started, let's get the sub-DAOs working, right? Let's get them focused on different things, the community set up. Then the later phases, as we get into things like the AI powered governance, and then also this thing, the new chain backend system. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take this sort of the beginnings of, okay, now we're going in the right directions and we're seeing the right things happening. Now we need to like optimize it, right? We need to make sure the governance really is robust and keeps learning from its experiences. And we do that with AI and the ability to integrate as much data as possible. So you don't need to have like a boss You can have the whole community simply collaborating on basically saving the learnings and the experience, and then using AI to retrieve it. But the final step, the thing that's really gonna like kick this dynamic into overdrive, is making the underlying tokenomics of the sub-DAOs, which we talked about briefly, just making that like hyper efficient, so that basically, as the tokens are being, as users are choosing which token to farm, as the tokens are being distributed in the ecosystem, as they're sort of flowing back into the, the value flows back into the core, the maker core through the yield of the collateral, the more we can make this because fundamentally, so this is fundamentally, there is some inefficiency in this, right? Because we're taking value and we're constantly converting it from one form to another, right? So there is some inefficiency in doing that conversion, but with the right backend, essentially, right? If this happens on the right type of marketplace and on the right type of computational structure, then that inefficiency can basically be reduced to effectively zero. What that's going to mean is that means then the sub-DAOs will just be, they'll have all the upsides of all this stuff we've been talking about, and they'll have none of the downside. And so that means, more developers, more L2s, more expansion into the Ethereum ecosystem, right? Like, it's entirely net positive for the whole ecosystem, right? Again, what's really happening is back to the Twitter drama, right? What's really happening is people are down, the down bad from the bull run, right? Like, people are hurting, right? Because we had so much hope for this space, and we were left disappointed. And it turned out that after DeFi summer, as I said, what remains is still just DeFi 1.0, right? There's a lot of emotions, right? People like to take something like this that is, again, right, it's a very nuanced thing that's sort of deep in the weeds of how we are trying to develop the whole ecosystem, and then they use it to like push the narrative of sort of like, I guess, numb their pain in some sense. I can't convince people that they have to realize this is good for Ethereum, this is good for the whole space, and it doesn't make sense to be tribalist about whatever backend or whatever, right? What tech? Is it PlayStation? Is it Xbox? Let's go crazy about that, right? That nobody benefits from that. But we can't talk our way out of that. We can build our way out of it. Once things start coming back, once we start seeing innovation from sub-DAOs, we start to see new people get excited, right? We come back with a new narrative to the outside world that, look, it's actually possible to do fun blockchain stuff and a lot of tokens and a lot of innovation without it all being a bunch of smoke and mirrors and it's going to blow up in your face. We can do it safely, and it's still fun and it's still innovative. If we get to that point, then people are going to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they're going to not be so emotional about it anymore. And I think we'll just get back to this, like the death of maximalism, right? That it's not going to be about this tribe or that tribe or this tech or whatever. It's going to be about the overall network effect of the entire ecosystem, right? The entire economy, which is kind of like its own country, or maybe even its own like continent or something like that, right? That's all benefiting from interoperability, trade, learning from each other, learning from each other's innovations. Once we're back in that mindset, that's when we know the good times are ahead.
Yeah, and if you just look on chain, you can also see it happening. Like, you guys have real earnings power. You're buying back the token. The team is coalescing. Like, I see you on Twitter. It seems like you got some swag now too. It's like, I saw a tweet this morning where you're like main character checking in. It's like you're ready to lead this thing. I love it. Just on RWAs, so one of the things that is driving the growth of Maker right now is the PSM kind of being refilled, function of the DAI or the DSR rate, but also just like more broad interest in switching from USDC to DAI. What happens to the PSM in the new version of Endgame? Where is that like owned by a sub-DAO, or it's like one of two sub-DAOs, or where does that go? Because that's like a lot of the economics.
Yeah. So the end game is absolutely that. This question of asset liability management, or let's say liquidity, like ensuring that there's liquidity and there's not going to be a bank run. That responsibility is going to sit with the sub-DAOs in the long run. and Maker will. I mean, because the whole model is this idea that the analogy is like Maker is going to act. As an analogy, Maker is going to act like a central bank, right? That's going to be the core protector of against tail risks, right? But it's not going to be going out there doing stuff out in the marketplace directly so much, right? It's going to outsource that to the analogy to the commercial banks, which are the sub-DAOs, right? By setting requirements for their capitalization, for their liquidity requirements, right? So basically, Maker is going to say sub-DAOs, they get to generate DAI from the core, and then they get to lend it out to users, let users generate it in various ways. But as they do that, they have to make sure that the DAI that they generate and the DAI they let enter circulation in the marketplace, fulfill certain sort of regulatory boundaries, essentially, that ensure that it's liquid enough. There are liquid stable coins that can back it. But then also that, there shouldn't be too much liquidity. There shouldn't be a bunch of sort of dead capital doing nothing, right? So the stuff that isn't needed to provide liquidity should be out there generating yield, building the global economy, right? Proving to the world that crypto actually is a force for good, right? So that the core will also make sure that that's allowed, right? And then what's so cool about it is then the sub-DAOs, they just get to basically, they will have these very clear rules and boundaries specified to them, and then they can just go out and innovate, right? And they can figure out the best solutions, they can learn from each other, they can take risks. If they do stuff that sort of oversteps the boundaries, then there'll be like penalties for doing that, right? But then, okay, then they basically will have to pay the penalties, and then they can just keep going and keep trying. And overall, the incentives and the boundaries are going to, not be overly prescriptive, right? So there's going to be so much room for innovation, but there's going to be basically like safety bounds, right? So you can, so the sub-DAOs can innovate, but they can't like accidentally innovate to blow up the system, right? That's the ideal dynamic, I think, right? And it's really it's analogous for how like a well-regulated free market economy works in the real world, right? You've got to have those good boundaries, and then then you stay away. Once the right boundaries are in place, you'll let that's when the free market can perform, right? And that's what we're going to do with sub-DAOs, but just supercharged with blockchain, community, tokenomics, AI, the whole thing. It's going to be glorious.
This is the sci-fi stuff that I got into crypto to participate in, and a future where there's 100 billion of DAI and it's being controlled by AI governance, and it's almost like this, as an analogy, a central bank video game. Is that kind of what you see is the future, or is there anything kind of beyond there, any even higher aspirations, even though those are pretty lofty?
I can't. I'm not capable of hallucinating that far, I guess. But I think that. I think that, like to your analogy, right, the video game thing, I think you could think of it also as like everything is like TikTokifying in a sense, right? Yep. So I do absolutely think that this is just happening across the board, right? So, and actually the most important and most impactful place it will happen is the financial system. So I guess we're going to be a first mover in this, and we're going to, really, really make sure it gets done the right way. Because, when I think about like TikTok banking, it's mostly, it sounds pretty bad. So we're going to make sure that we get off to a good start, right? And we sort of set the right, standard, and ultimately provide the best alternative. And really just, if all the other stuff goes down the dark path of the dark TikTok fi or whatever you were going to call that, then Maker will be there to be the place where everyone should go.
I love it. Well, we're out of time. Rune, thank you so much, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone.